There's this pretty famous saying in world building, in the tabletop scene, and you've probably heard it if you listen to an actual play podcast, watched Critical Role, or, even played a tabletop game yourself. And it comes from Dungeon World, a 2012 tabletop role-playing game. And the quote is, "Make maps, leave blank spaces." It may sound counterintuitive, right? Because we make maps to fill in blank spaces. A map with a blank space is an incomplete map. But when we're making places for storytelling, whether those places are fictional or not, they don't need to be contiguous. One place doesn't need to explicitly connect to another. It's great to start with, a massive map that has some cities and it has some regions in it, maybe the peoples that live there. But once you start filling in too much of the connective stuff, it starts making an expansive world feel small. Oddly, there doesn't seem to be much mainstream uptake of this concept. There's inevitably something happening in every corner of Westeros. And if that one island from Eternals isn't on screen, we should always be talking about it. Every cameo character in a Star Wars thing, whether it's a short or a movie, has a robust Wikipedia page.
Hit it, Max.
More and more, it feels like the media that has these large, expansive worlds with the biggest budgets, they're more concerned with filling in 6-month gaps on a timeline or returning to tried and true characters on tried and true planets in tried and true cantinas. And honestly, I think that it's probably one of the reasons there are so many grumpy fans out there. And that's why I've been so enamored with Flintlock: The Siege of Dawn recently. It's a Souls-like game made by A44. It takes place in a Flintlock fantasy universe, which is kind of cool. And beyond the Napoleonic uniforms and interesting take on Souls-like gameplay, the thing that makes me keep thinking about this game weeks after I've finished it is that it's practically a masterclass on making maps and leaving spaces. You play as Nor Vanek, a sapper or an explosives expert, 10 years into her service at Dawn. And Dawn is this massive city protected on one side by precise walls mimicking 18th century star forts, and on the other side by, what I can only describe as a Dr. Seussian mountain. 10 years ago, a massive door in the mountain, fabled to be the door between the realms of the living and the dead, it was opened, and then there was an invasion of zombies that poured out of this door into the heart of Dawn. And for 10 years, the Coalition has been laying siege to the metropolis of Dawn, trying to hold this invasion of the dead out of their crown jewel city back. Especially in the early hours of Flintlock, it's impossible to know what's down that trench or through that doorway. Starting the game in media res is a great way to get you into the action. You get right in there, you start going. But so many games stumble because they spend too much time throwing proper nouns at you instead of letting you live in the world as the character is. And that can lead to you getting pretty bogged down and not knowing what's going on. So rarely do I leave the opening hours of a game like this with a laundry list of questions about the cosmology of the game, the different cultures, or even the literal borders of what I'm fighting for. And I think that's what makes Flintlock so unique. Throughout the game, you'll visit 3 main places: the Kneeling Peaks, Wanderer's Rest, and Dawn. Snowy Mountains, Sandy Desert, and the modern decayed metropolis, respectively. There are maps of each region that help you navigate, but travel between the regions require talking to your camp of companions, packing up, and traveling for weeks. From the player's point of view, there's not a world map. How these places are connected physically, politically, or culturally, it can only be inferred by what you come across. There's oblique references to how the judges of the peaks feel about the Coalition, but the Coalition is never even explicitly explained. Coalition of what? Nations? Volunteers? True believers? Who knows? And that's a huge blank space that's left open for possibility. You play this entire game and you'll never know, and I think the game is better for it. Flintlock is a 10 to 15 hour game, and you spend it in roughly 3-ish open zones. Each of them feels rich with their own distinct cultures, but just like Nor, you're an outsider on a mission. Every city and village is laden with stuff that just begs the question, why? For a shorter game constrained by the budgets of independent development, this world feels bigger and more mysterious than most AAA titles. The writing and world design are a subtle magic trick, somehow making this 9-armed, faceless being that holds up a mask to communicate with you feel normal. Flintlock doesn't go out of its way to tell you its world or its history. I mean, the best you'll get is in item descriptions or little scraps of paper that you pick up that are hidden throughout the world. That's something that we've grown a bit more used to as FromSoft games become a bit more mainstream. I mean, you'll come across mentions of the old magic or sorcerers. You'll read things about people who believed in the gods that you've been tasked with killing but don't anymore. But there's never a why or a how. Your companion throughout the game is Enki. He's a little fennec fox who is actually one of the gods of old. I mean, he'll fill in little pieces of lore here and there, but they're always on a much smaller scale than I had expected. You know, he'll lend a feather to an astronomer who promises to name a constellation after him, or he'll lend another one to a family in the desert who have to return it to him because it has brought doom on their family. I mean, it appears that the lives and deaths of man is completely insignificant to the gods besides crossing this barrier from the living to the dead. I mean, you won't even find a grand explanation on how the people lost their faith in these gods, why people don't know their names anymore, or who even created the coalition. I mean, it's completely unknown. Like, are these even nations that have names? You barely understand who the gods you're killing are, let alone what they are the gods of. I mean, even by the end of the game, you end up leaving with more mysteries than answers, more blank spaces that are probably never going to be filled in. Take it from a guy with a games lore podcast. I mean, some of the best worlds that we talk about on Codex are oftentimes a couple of points of interest here and there, and nothing but blank spaces in between. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.